Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic, Kobe Newell, and today we'll be doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees the release of Barbenheimer. That's right, we have the official release of Barbie and Oppenheimer, both of which are going to be appealing to vastly different audiences as some of the early box office numbers are seeming to indicate. The big question, of course, is going to be which one is going to be able to have the most staying power, as Barbie is expected to have the biggest opening of the two, but Oppenheimer seems to be the better film of the two. However, there's also a lot of other caveats that could hold Oppenheimer back, but we, of course, will break all of that stuff down. Also, we do have the second official weekend numbers for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, or at least the projections for what those numbers will be, and let's just say it's looking just about what you would expect for a movie like this. So I think the most interesting thing about Mission Impossible at this point will be what are those international numbers, as I'm sure what we'll find from Barbie and Oppenheimer is that they will take some of the international space, but we all know that Mission Impossible is specifically, especially the last several films, an international franchise, and so that will still have a pretty loud voice in that market. The question is going to be, of course, how much of a voice will it still have? Either way, this is expected to be one of the biggest weekends of the box office, at the very least for this summer, if not for the entire year. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, light that fire button, Ozzy, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know our time video or live stream goes live on the channel. Barely got it through that time. But we have Box Office Pro's numbers here, and let me just stay out right off the bat. I think that these numbers are a little bit ridiculous. And the reason why I think they're ridiculous is because when you go with the so-called experts of the box office, talking here, of course, about Tony and Nance over at Deadline, my favorite, right now they are projecting that combined worldwide numbers for Barbie and Oppenheimer will be $260 million, and they are suspecting that you could get upwards of $100 million domestic for Barbie, whereas you have with Oppenheimer expected to get around $50 million. And so when I look at these numbers and when I look at the range for them, they have it between 90 and 125 million, and Warner Brothers only believing that Barbie will get 75 million. For them to go out and say they believe that the movie is going to get $158.5 million domestically alone, let's just say that sounds a little bit fanciful. That sounds a little bit out of reach. It sounds a little bit insane. And remember that that is their average. So they are saying that they potentially could see, based on the metrics that they use, that the film could get upwards of $175 million domestically. Now, am I saying that it's impossible? Am I saying that it's just not going to happen? No. Obviously, anything is possible. As you all know, if the numbers are there, they are there. But to try and be, or rather to simply be this far off from what the typical standard is, as we see being reported over at Deadline, again, I think it's a little bit too rambunctious. We all know that when it comes to Box Office Pro, a lot of their metrics are not only based off of tracking, like as far as box office tracking, but it's also based off of social media interactions and other metrics like that, which is the reason why their numbers tend to be off. They tend to overestimate. They tend to give a little bit more than what eventually actually comes in. Sometimes they can be on the mark with it. Sometimes they can very much miss the mark on it. But I just think for this one movie especially, it just does not seem quite right to me. Again, when the studio itself is saying they think 75 million, and then the industry experts say, okay, yeah, you're being conservative there, Warner Brothers, so we're going to go ahead and say probably closer to 90 to maybe 125 million domestic, because right now the word of mouth on it is, again, very palpable, meaning that it's very vocal. There's a lot of people talking about it. The word of mouth that I've been hearing, though, is, I think, going to be the ultimate demise of the film, especially in the second and third week after. If most of the people coming out of the film, the general audiences who are going to start to see this film tonight, then if they start to come out of it with a very similar thought of, oh man, this movie hates men. Oh man, this movie is not just feminist, but uber feminist, to the point where it's not even real feminism anymore at this point. It's just pure political nonsense at this point. Then guess what? A lot of people are going to get turned off by that. We all know that word of mouth can make or break a movie. And when it comes to a film like this with such a massive IP, if you find out, if families find out, if parents find out that the movie is preaching a specific political message and is beating you over the head, Christian Toto, who is a movie reviewer, shout out to him. He actually reported that the movie script itself mentions the word patriarchy 10 times in it. I'm sure that's what everyone wanted to go see a Barbie movie about, right? Was to see the word patriarchy mentioned 10 times in the actual script. But if that has an impact, well, then guess what? We're going to see the film drop off quite a bit next week. But we have to actually wait and see what the numbers are going to be. I still suspect that it's going to be a very large opening, especially domestically. Probably could be one of the best domestic openings of the summer, if not of the entire year. But that does not necessarily mean that the film is going to be able to have the legs in the long run one, and ultimately I think the word of mouth is going to have a major impact there. Also from Box Office Pro, they are suspecting that instead of the $50 million being projected by the industry so-called experts, they think that Oppenheimer could get upwards of $64.7 million, and probably one of the reasons why is not only because there's a lot of buzz around the movie, but also because of the meme Barbenheimer. I think that ultimately that is what is leading them to have these highly inflated numbers compared to what even the studio itself is thinking that is going to happen with this movie as far as, Barbie is concerned. But the fact that they are having it that much higher, not only with Barbie, but also Oppenheimer, I would not be surprised if they're kind of running with the Barbenheimer meme and saying, hey, that's a lot of social interactions. Social interactions sometimes can lead to ticket sales, but as we all know, that is not always the case. You can have a massive social media presence and yet do nothing as far as ticket sales are concerned. This is one of the reasons why I know that there was some speculation when a film like Black Adam came out with The Rock. Everyone was kind of pointing to, hey, The Rock has, hundreds of millions of subscribers on Instagram, etc., and yet that did not make the film that much of a success, really of any success at all. In fact, a lot more successful than The Flash, but still not a success in its own right. And so I do think that it is interesting that that is a metric that's still being used by this site. But again, we'll see who is going to be right, whether it's going to be the actual studio, which is always going to try to basically undermine it because it gives them the excuse where, well, we only thought 75 million. And so if it only makes 80 million, they'll say, well, it did better than our projections. Whereas a site like this is saying, hey, we're using different metrics, we're changing the game, which is why I do appreciate them to a certain degree because they at least are doing something a little different than what some of the other sites and other trackers end up doing. We do have, of course, the second weekend numbers for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and this is something that I've been saying is going to be basically a make or break, I think, for this movie going forward. And so right now the projections are from Box Office Pro, so again, take them with a grain of salt. They could be lower, they could be higher. They think the film is going to make $25.8 million this coming weekend, bringing its total domestic to $125.9. That would be a 53% drop, or again, 53% hold, however it is that you want to view it. And I think that that is basically about as fine as you could possibly accept for a movie like this. It does confirm that we are not going to see, and this is something that we kind of knew going into it already, we're not going to see Top Gun Maverick numbers for this movie, especially in the domestic market. It's very clear from the opening weekend, from the subsequent daily changes that we've seen in the box office, that it's not performing in that same way. Domestically, we still don't really have all that information when it comes to its international performance, right? It is doing vastly better in various markets compared to many of the other films that come out from this year. So I would not personally be surprised if you see Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning be able to make upwards of $600 million internationally, whereas domestically, it's looking with only a 125.9 being projected. And again, that could be higher, it could be lower. That would mean that the end result domestically for the film will probably be closer to maybe $250-ish million domestic. But remember, the films tend to, and the last few have all made about 2.5 times internationally what they made domestically. And so if that indeed were to actually hold, then you would indeed see, right, a $250 million domestic would mean that you could see upwards of again, roughly of well over $600 million, right? And so I think that that is still on the table for the film. Would that be enough to make it break even? Well, then that would break its total international to over $800 million. According to my charting, that would make it at the break even point, because my break even for the film is around $725 million. If you have a 3 times multiplier, that would make the break even around $900 million. So again, basically it would depend on what metrics you're ending up using to determine your break even. But either way, I think that it would still be close enough, whatever chart you're using, to say that, hey, even if it's not the huge success at the box office that many of us were suspecting, myself included, and it may not hit $1 billion, again, I still think that's still on the table. It depends on how strong domestically it holds. And again, I think that this is definitely going to be an interesting weekend and a very important weekend domestically for the determining factors that will lead to whether it's going to be successful here or not. But internationally, I think it's going to be the much bigger story with that, as many of us knew it would be going into the weekend. What's still most impressive of all, though, is Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom not only has officially crossed $100 million, some people were reporting it the other day, but it is now officially crossed $100 million at the box office. So again, congratulations to them for being able to do that. And again, Tony, once again, has to try to add his own commentary to even the title. Sound of Freedom, Jim Caviezel, anti-child trafficking thriller. Again, what other kind of movie can there actually be? Why can't you just say Sound of Freedom, starring Jim Caviezel, thriller, rings past $100 million? It's almost as if they're trying to remind people what the movie's about because, hey, at least you're not mentioning QAnon in your title, but let's just be honest. We all know how unfairly that you have treated this movie in the past, Tony, and let's even see. Wow, that's one of the shortest articles that I've ever seen. Oh my goodness. And again, this kind of goes to show you that the modern Hollywood left and the modern Hollywood media are continuing to try to essentially destroy and misrepresent what the film is actually about and the facts that are presented in the film. And yes, I said facts. As it says here, exclusive Angel Studios' unexpected summer hit Sound of Freedom clicked past $100 million in the 16th day of its release. The non-major studio Hollywood movie, which has been a gift exhibition, has dynamited the red state, flyover state, and faith-based audience crowd. How about it's just motivated a ton of people across the spectrum? I've known people that would not describe themselves as being flyover state, who would not describe themselves as being a faith-based person, who have seen the film, felt compelled to see the film, and have been moved by it. This is the reason why Hollywood is failing. This is the reason why people like Tony at Deadline are failing, because when they look at this, they don't fully understand it. All they can do is try to paint it into this box, into the very, very narrow framework, into this very, very narrow understanding. They can't quite understand the fullness of what is going on with this movie. And again, as you can see here, it goes on to continue to try to paint it in a different light. It says the movie posted a $14.2 million opening day plus previews, first 3 days being $19.6 million. An amazing second weekend where it went up 39%. The Pix fever from out of nowhere is reminiscent of Warner Brothers' Clint Eastwood record-grossing title American Sniper, which appealed heavily in the red states. This, again, please stop trying to paint this as a red state or as a conservative movie in any way. I mean, this is just getting sick at this point. And then it goes on. An indie title that nobody, talking about my big fat Greek wedding, an indie title that nobody ever thought would clear $241 million back in 2002. Again, a very different, older audience for that romantic comedy. Oh, okay. So wait, it's a conservative right-wing audience for Sound of Freedom, but oh no, it's a very different audience for My Big Fat Greek Wedding. We're not going to politicize what that audience is. No, we're not going to put a political label on that one. That movie was able to bring all people together. You see what they're doing here? And also, if your implication is that only quote-unquote conservative right-wing people are going to be interested in seeing a movie that exposes child trafficking, that says a lot more about those that you would describe as quote-unquote liberal or left-leaning, now wouldn't it? But clearly, this movie is doing very, very well. It's actually probably one of the better performers at the box office. And it's not because of the raw totals, right? The raw totals are not that impressive in and of themselves, right? When you're comparing $100 million domestic to some of the, multiple millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that we've seen from other movies. But when you take into account how little the studio spent, these are massive returns on investment that most of the movies coming out this year have not been able to see. Most movies coming out this year have seen financial losses in some way or another. So this is already a huge win on that front. In addition to that, the media has been against them. Tony over at Deadline has misrepresented them, has tried to paint them into this box, basically trying to, make people less interested in actually going out to see and support it and support the message that it's trying to get out there. But what you've ultimately seen from this is that it's backfired. This has made more and more people interested in the movie, and this has also, I think, helped it in the long run because guess what? People do not trust the media anymore as far as the mainstream media is concerned. So hey, kudos to Sound of Freedom. A 23% hold is what they're projecting here, which would be incredibly impressive, bringing its total domestic to $126 million, meaning that this movie would then have more domestically than Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, ultimately, do I think that Mission Impossible will have a higher end domestic run by the end of its run? Yes. When you have extra hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing spend and in financial reach, and also in this, again, the fact that it is a storied franchise, I do think that the long-term run of this movie will definitely help it out in the long run. I do think that Mission Impossible will be able to leg out, but the fact that Sound of Freedom is going to be above it this weekend, the fact that Sound of Freedom just the other day, in fact, the Wednesday numbers came in, and guess what? Sound of Freedom was the #1 film over Mission Impossible. That is incredibly impressive, an incredibly impressive feat for Sound of Freedom. And also, some are pointing to say, hey, that doesn't look very good for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. But remember, Mission Impossible is a franchise that takes a while, right? We've seen this happen with the previous movies. They leg out. And we're seeing already that trend with 53% hold projected for this weekend. That's looking like it'll be the case. The big question is going to be internationally. If we see a massive drop-off internationally, that domestic hold is not going to be enough. If we see a strong hold internationally, then I'll be exactly where I was last weekend saying the movie's doing just fine. Where if we have a massive drop-off internationally, then I would ultimately say, hey, you know what? It looks like this film may not actually get to the lengths that I thought that it was possible of actually doing. A film that is definitely not going to be able to reach anything close to what anyone had or thought or projected going into this summer is Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny, which is continuing to drop off 40%. This film, a massive financial loss for Disney, a massive financial failure, and hey, could not happen to a nicer company. Ultimately, though, the big question is, how much is Barbie and how much is Oppenheimer going to make? Personally, I am going to see Barbie tonight. You might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, you were talking earlier about the things that people have been saying about the movie, etc. And yeah, but the problem is, and the reason why I go to see these kinds of movies is because I do not want to see the space. I was talking about this on my live stream yesterday. I don't think it's good for us to seed the space, meaning that if I and others who are more likely to be critical and to call out political nonsense being pushed down people's throats, as we are hearing is happening in this movie, just like we've seen happen in previous movies as well, then if we are not here to talk about it, then no one is here to talk about it, which means that you are left with a bunch of people that are probably going to be simping for the movie and are probably going to be pushing for and promoting it, meaning that more and more people are going to be exposed to this kinds of nonsense and could be influenced. We all know, kids especially, are heavily influenced by this kind of crap. And so if this is going to be something that they are trying to expose to children, and we all know modern Hollywood loves to expose various things to children in various ways, and in very disgusting ways for that fact, guess what? I think that it's important for us to be here, to call it out, and to be critical of this kind of nonsense. But the big question is going to be, how much does it make? I personally am more on the line of where Deadline is. To me, this film making around $100 million makes a little bit more sense domestically, right? This film is expected to make about $50 million or so internationally. Oppenheimer making around $50 million domestically, making another $50, $60 million internationally. That also makes sense to me. I think that ultimately Oppenheimer comes away with a $100+ million opening worldwide, and I think Barbie comes in with closer to $150+ million internationally, worldwide, rather just worldwide totals overall, and that you see Dead Reckoning Part 1 come in also quite strong. I think that's going to be a very, very strong weekend for the box office, and I think that Barbie's going to end up winning the weekend, but I think next weekend's going to be especially interesting because not only is this going to be one of the biggest opening weekends that we've had in a very, very long time, if not the entire year, next weekend, I think, will be more interesting because I think Oppenheimer will see very strong holds for a 3-hour drama with a lot of people talking. As we all know, Grace Randolph loved Barbie and talked about how she loved how feminist it was, but then also hated Oppenheimer because it was a talkie. It was a talking movie with people talking about ideas and things, and oh man, can't have any of that now, can we? The fact that a movie like that, though, is expected to have this kind of opening and is likely going to hold very strong because the word of mouth on that film is much more positive than what we've seen coming out of Barbie. And again, basically Barbie is breaking down on ideological lines. And that's why I mentioned this yesterday too. Barbie is now more and more, now that the film has come out, now that we have these early thoughts, now that we have people like Christian Toto and many others, shout out to Shad, he had a great review of this too with his wife. I think that ultimately what we are seeing is, I think, a redoing of Ghostbusters 2016. Now, the big difference is that Barbie, much bigger franchise, much bigger IP, and so I think the opening weekend is definitely going to be bigger, but I do think the messaging being pushed, very similar to what we saw in Ghostbusters 2016, is going to lead to the film's downfall. Now, whether it's going to lose money or not, we will not know until we get the actual data coming in this weekend and the fall off next weekend, which I do think will be high, but it also will be a pretty big indicator of, hey, how much does this stuff impact the movies that are coming out? How much does that actually impact the audiences going to see these films or not have an impact? We will, of course, find out. But what are y'all's thoughts? Do you think that Barbie is going to be able to come in well over $100 million this coming weekend? Again, I think the range that is given here by Deadline makes sense, 90 to 125 million. And I think that for Oppenheimer, it also makes sense they having that film to be around 40 to 50 million domestic with around 45+ million internationally. So again, $100 million is what they're projecting internationally for Oppenheimer. That makes sense to me. 150 or so coming in for Barbie makes also some sense to me. Or are you of the mindset of Box Office Pro? Do you think that it could get upwards of 158.5? I think that's a little bit too high. Again, 100 million or a little over 100 million would make sense. Even again, that's actually towards the higher end. Warner Brothers says 75, so that would already be 25 million more than what they expect. I don't think it would be that much higher than that, but again, we of course will have to wait and see, especially as it is being reported that when it comes to Barbie, it has the best ticket pre-sales since Avatar Way of Water. But the big problem with pre-sales is that ain't everything. Walk-ups are still the dominant force in today's market, and walk-ups are typically determined by word of mouth. And the word of mouth on this movie is that, hey, a lot of people are enjoying it, but what kind of people are enjoying it? And what are the political affiliations of the people enjoying it? And what is this all about the film being a quote-unquote feminist dream or a feminist call to arms, as one reviewer described it to be? Is that something that people want in their movies? I think the vast majority of the general audiences do not want that kind of messaging in their film, but hey, We'll have to wait and see. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, let the fire button, Odyssey, and smash the rumble button. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you on Sunday for a full box office breakdown to see exactly what happens and what happens in the future. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off first with my members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Heimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, check out his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Monomator General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my Subscribe Star peeps, Zion Voders, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. So thank y'all very much for being my supporters at the Keep of the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out that top link in the video description below to find out ways to sign up to support the channel and to be able to get access to things like the shoutouts, but also to giveaways. I have an exclusive giveaways channel on my Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff, and also access to an exclusive podcast that I do once or twice a month, depending on what I'm able to get accomplished, especially over the course of this crazy, crazy busy summer. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.